name is Carrie Lee, and thank you for tuning in. Today, we're going to talk about my secret weapon in e-commerce loss prevention. What is e-commerce loss prevention? In retail, loss prevention is focused on preventing employee theft and shoplifting. So in e-commerce, you don't have people in a physical store, it's all online. And so the loss prevention is focused primarily on fraud and returns. E-commerce loss prevention is a somewhat new concept because retailers who are selling online are more focused on generating revenue than preventing returns. So if you don't have a return strategy for your online store already, you're not alone. Most store owners that I've spoken with are pretty clueless when it comes to what their return rates are, what their different returner profiles look like, and what their overall return strategy for preventing return losses is. When it comes to online returns, not all returns are actually bad. There are some returns that are good, and having a positive returns experience can actually become a profit center and a reason that customers come back. Customers report that most of them review a return policy before placing an order, and having a seamless returns experience actually promotes more shopping, not more returns. Hiding the returns policy, which I've seen some retailers do, is more of an ostrich approach of trying to avoid returns or not address them proactively. And adopting a return strategy that's proactive and data-driven can actually help prevent returns and increase profitability because your customers will be happy that they can shop knowing that if it doesn't work out, they can return or exchange something very easily. So there are still the bad types of returns as well as the ugly. So ugly returns relates to fraud. And so that the fraud can be somebody purchases something not from your site and then tries to return it to you. But if you have order reconciliation or a data-driven approach, you'll be able to tell if that order was actually purchased from you versus another online store. That's actually an advantage that e-commerce sites have over retail, is it can be more difficult to track an omni-channel purchase when something is bought in store and then returned without a tag versus online, you can reconcile the orders more easily. It's also important when you're considering your returns approach and your strategy to know that your returns policy and how you handle and approach returns is all an extension of your brand. What do you want your ethos to be? What do you want your customers to experience when something isn't quite right? It's actually an opportunity for you to help customers with when something isn't right. That will stick with them more so than just the general experience of shopping on your site. And then timing wise, now is a really great time to implement a return strategy because after the holidays, that's the highest time of the year for an influx in returns. So most online retailers are very busy planning for shopping holidays like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and other holidays and end of year when individuals and companies are doing a lot of gift giving. So it's great that you see this increase in revenue, but you'd be remiss not to plan for the potential loss that's related to the influx in sales and the influx in gifting. So now let's turn towards how you can prevent e-commerce losses in the form of returns. So the first thing to do is analyze the cost of returns and where cost can come into play when we're talking about returns. First of all, when somebody wants to request a return, how is that request fielded? There's a good chance that you have a customer service agent who's perhaps paid hourly to field those inbound inquiries. And so the time spent handling returns is a cost, it's an overhead cost to your business. Forward logistics is just a fancy way of explaining shipping your item to your customer. And then reverse logistics explains shipping the item back to you when it's returned. Another cost to your business is wastage from returns. And so wastage essentially is when products are damaged or they come back in a condition that they can't be resold, refurbished, upcycled, etc. And that's just lost revenue, as well as materials cost and inventory. And then your return rate and your revenue loss are also metrics to look at. And then the cost of preventable returns is a more abstract concept, but an important concept nonetheless, because if you could be implementing a return strategy that prevents returns, you're leaving money on the table. So the cost of preventable returns is essentially your opportunity cost for not having a good return strategy in place. So the next step to preventing e-commerce losses is to understand the different shopper profiles of who's returning. So some customers may be first-time customers and they're returning. In that case, you have to think, well, how can I make this experience so good that they're willing to shop again? Or is there an incentive or an exchange that I can offer this customer? So instead of losing them in the long term, I'm actually keeping them and showing them that the experience is a great shopping experience, even when things don't go well. There are also customers who are repeat customers and they have a very high volume of returns, but that's because they buy a bunch of stuff, try it on at home, and then decide to send some of it back. And so even though you may see those customers as a pain, if you look at the numbers, customers who buy a lot and return a lot, you may see are some of your best customers. So again, what incentives can you offer those customers knowing that they're going to return a certain percentage of what they buy? On the other hand, there are types of returners who are either fraudulent or bad returners. So these are the types of returners who maybe they buy a high-end item and then post a photo on social media to show how cool they are and then return it, or generally using something and return it. Someone I spoke with the other day was talking about how flexible Costco's return policy is and how some people will go out and buy the really big screen TVs for the Super Bowl and then return those TVs, which me personally, that seems pretty risky and also unethical. But nevertheless, there are fraudulent returners. And so if you see that that sort of behavior is live in your online store, then you can look into, well, how do I prevent this? Can I put in my return policy only certain types of products can be returned, open box versus in packaging unopened? There are a lot of strategic decisions to make, but you can only make those informed decisions once you've done the research to understand what are the different types of customers and how they're returning, what their behavior is. Similar to that, you'll want to look at the reasons that things are coming back. So for an apparel brand, the most common reason for returns is a size or fit issue, because you can't go into the dressing room and try something on, you're just eyeballing it online. So if you see a lot of returns that are coming back for this reason, which is again common for apparel, maybe a certain SKU that's coming back a high volume of the time, you can look at that sizing chart, you can add photos, you can add a comment that customers report that this item runs small, for example. So collecting and analyzing that data on an ongoing basis is going to help you prevent returns. Quality issues are another reason for return, and that could be damage and defects that occur in production. It could also be during shipping. If you're a drop shipper or you have vendor agreements and you see that items are coming back a certain percent of the time for damage and defect, you can either contact a carrier or contact your partner and say, hey, we have an agreement that damage and defect rate is 5%, and I see that this is coming back at 8. And again, that's another way that you can recoup some of those losses. And then you can also fix quality issues if you're also the manufacturer. Fulfillment errors, meaning they ordered one thing and the person in the warehouse or whoever's managing your order fulfillment sent them the wrong thing. Unwanted gifts, this is another case, especially with the holidays coming up, where You buy somebody a thoughtful gift and they don't want it. So their choices are to regift or to return. Another thing to look out for is a product description mismatch. So this could be the color looks a certain way on the website versus when it arrived. And digging deeper into why these mismatches and the returned items are coming back can help you then update that product description to prevent those returns and the losses from coming in the future. Change of heart is a difficult one to prevent because you can't read people's minds, unfortunately, but you can look at the data, and if it could be drilled down to the customer level where you can see this person's order history in the past, and perhaps you would have been able to predict that they wouldn't like that particular item based on the pattern of their purchasing behavior. That sort of thing might be difficult to track manually, but there are certainly software and tech around using AI and machine learning that might help you do that. That's more of an advanced level thing. Finding a better price, unfortunately, there's a lot of data out there, and it's possible that customers will request a return because they found it cheaper somewhere else. Again, that's up to you whether you allow returns for various reasons, but these are just things to consider when you're crafting your return policy of what are the different reasons for return. And again, we already talked about fraudulent returns and wardrobing, which fraudulent returns you definitely want to avoid at all costs, as well as wardrobing if all of the items are coming back. But wardrobing can actually be a positive experience if you're allowing people to buy a lot of things with the understanding that they keep a lot of things. So when it comes to crafting your return policy, we talked about a lot of the issues to look at before crafting it. But one important one is to understand what the laws are in your jurisdiction. So some countries and some areas require that you offer at least 14 days, no matter what, to take something back. So you should definitely understand what the laws are so that you're not breaking the law. A typical return window is 30 days, but think about what your customers might want. The current trends are to offer extended return windows, and some trial at home programs are becoming popular. Part of that is because the pandemic had a great impact on supply chain and things were just delayed, but also customers are wanting more time to make up their mind. And it's also common for brands to decide to implement a separate return strategy and policy for the holidays when you've got a lot of gifting and people are busy with family and wrapping up the end of the year, may not be able to get to the store in time or ship their items back. So that's a pretty common thing, is to offer an extended window during the holidays. We talked about the types of return, and in your policy, you should try to clearly outline what is allowed. Can I return it if it's beyond the window? Maybe you can make exceptions and give them a partial credit. Is there a restocking fee? Does it need to be new? What happens if it's damaged or there's some sort of defect or I have the wrong item? Do you want a photo? Do they send that by email, or can they upload it via returns portal? How does that work? Return logistics we talked about in the return costs, and that can be, how do I print out my shipping label to return this? Or is there a card packaged in my shipment that I can just put it on a box and send it back? Does it have to be in original packaging? Who's going to pay for the shipping costs? How long does it take for me to get my refund? And then any sort of other special circumstances that might relate to your brand or your product mix, or again, holidays and gifting. So to summarize, some of the ways that you can prevent returns and losses for your e-commerce business are to first analyze and understand what the various costs are of returns. And then you can identify common reasons for returns and the return requests that you get in your business, why they're occurring. And then understanding within your customer base, what are the different types of return profiles? who are my best returners and who are my worst returners? How can I improve the experience and improve profitability from my best customers? And how can I deter fraudulent and bad returners? And once you've assessed all these different data points, how do you create a return policy that clearly outlines the process with customers in mind? Because again, the return policy is part of your brand and part of the brand experience. And if you're interested in long-term customer value, having a seamless, easy, transparent return policy is very important. And then from a strategic standpoint for your business, also considering what the typical costs are, budget those so that you can offer a good returns experience without worrying how much it's going to impact your bottom line. So budgeting, and then also having a system in place that you can collect your returns data, understand your return rate, and monitor and adjust your return policies accordingly. Thank you so much for spending these 15 minutes with me. I really appreciate your time and would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Hi. My name is Jolien. I'm originally from Belgium, so I do have my accent, but today what you will notice is mainly that I talk about one word a lot, and it's about scaling. Scaling. Scaling up your marketing game, scaling up your business game, scaling up yourself. So, Larry, let's go. Every entrepreneur wishes two things. We hear more time, because if we have more time, we can invest in our company. We can invest in our friends and our families and, our partner, because we want to do so much. But at the same time, we also want to have the money, because if we have the money, then we can invest it in Google Ads. We can invest it in marketing operations, so we can make our business successful. So overall, balancing time and money, it is so crucial, because if not, it will go to waste. And that is what we all want. And how can we do this? Simple word, think you know it. Scaling. Scaling is the ability to exponentially grow your marketing business, yourself, without being hampered. And I already start seeing, it's great, you can from zero to hero, it's great, and I want to do it. But at a lot of time, you're also thinking, probably I will have to do much more for the same budget. The expectations will be much higher. So you already started freaking out, because you're already thinking, if you scale too fast, will I not dilute your brand? If, you add more people into your team, will they still, give the same consistency that your customers and, the awareness that your customers are used to it? If you add more new system in place, will you still focus on the right priorities? So a lot of questions are going here in your voice, like scaling is great, but it is also a challenge. And it is a challenge, for sure. But I must say, congratulations. Why? You made it. The first step is having that mindset, that scalar mindset, I call it. It's a scalar, but also an entrepreneur at the same time. And it's having that growth mindset, understanding what scaling is, what it entails, what the benefits are, but also what the challenges can be. So, check. First one is already completed. And first, before we go further, I just want to be sure about the definitions, because growing is one thing. And growing is, for instance, we are now Q3, Q4, and we got a revenue. We got 50K in revenue, but then at the same time in Q2, we had to hire a new marketing person, 60K, So it leverages each other up, definitely in the beginning. Scaling is where, for instance, you invest 5K in a marketing automation tool, and it will get you revenue of 50K. So you see, you go from 1 to 10 to 100 more easily versus growing. And that is a big difference between scaling and growing. And I already see you thinking, how can I start scaling? What should I do? What are the tactics? 4 simple tactics. Start to automate your processes. If you think about it, you have a customer LinkedIn outreach, or you have an employee calling your customer. What is it that he or she will say? What is a message that you still want to bring to your customers? And make it in a playbook, write it down. Phase 1, these are the channels and these are the descriptions that we need to say. Phase 2, these are, for instance, documents that I want to send over. And go back to the first page where I said about time and money. Here you will win on time, on the longer run. It will take you a little bit of time to make everything, to prepare with this playbook, but you will have time on the long run. So that is one. A second one is subscription-based models. If you have every month, every quarter, every year, a kind of, income, you can already spend it. So it's having that money that you have in the bank and immediately you can spend it. The third one is diversify income streams. If you think about it, you have a product or a service. What are the add-ons? Can you add, for instance, a maintenance service? Can you add a branding extra feature to it? Can you add, there's so many add-ons. You can just think about it. So how can you really diversify your income stream? And, it will generate more revenue. And then the last one is customer retention. High customer retention rate is so important. I think everybody knows the 80-20 rules. 20% of your customers will do 80% of your revenue. And they will win on time because they will have, they will do word of mouth. They are your raving fans. They are your customers you can rely on and they will do the work for themselves. And then you will also win on money because the transaction costs will be much higher because they believe in your product. So start to think about these tactics. Here are just 4, but there are many more. Think about it. How can they win on my time and on my money? If not of the two, don't consider as a tactic. And of course, everything that you do, measure it. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it, once Peter Drucker said. And it is so true. Because, for instance, you can say to a guy, to a lady, an employee, you need to call an SDR, you need to make schedule a call, one in a day. It means 1 a day, it means 5 a week, it means 20 a month, it means 240 meetings a year. If you have 3 or 4 people like that, you have quite a lot of meeting schedules. And if your conversion rate is then as well 10%, you can do a pretty good job. So think about these things. And of course, I already hear you thinking, yeah, but it's quantity and not quality. Then make that in place. Put a marketing manager in place. And then, you start to think about, he or she is responsible for the number of leads, the dollar amount that is generated in inbound leads or from these callings. So start thinking about it. How can you track everything and measure it on a weekly basis? And you already start thinking, you already get, yeah, I want to do it. Yeah, it's easy. When does it start to scale? Don't do it immediately. Think first. Because very simple is this, a business model exists out 3 parts. You have the startup part, where you really start thinking about your product marketing fit. Is my product or my service, is it allowed? Is it, accepted by the market? And then if so, you go to a scaling phase. And after your scaling phase, either, an exit strategy, or you do a takeover, or somebody buys you, or you're just happy, you just grow a little bit further. All fine. But right now, here we are focusing on that scaling part. And that scaling part is important if you have, if you have the capability to start scaling. And also, is your company capable to handle this growth? If you have the capacity, and you're also capable to start growing, then keep on, thinking further. You might be in a good direction to get, a sense of when it's a good start to start scaling. And think about as well these questions, my employees are saying, yeah, I have too much work. And it's sustainable workload you want to give them. Also, the leads are coming in. It's not 10 any month. It's not 20 a month anymore. It's 40, it's 50. It is start to scale. Your goals are overachieved easily. And also your income streams are, is really stable. It is not like 1 month you have here from 0 and then the other month is a lot and then you go down again. But you really understand all these things. It is opportunities you get. People are wanting to have your product or your service. Your demand is there. And you don't want to do too fast because you want to still focus on your quality and your consistency and you don't want to dilute your brand. But at the same time, you need to start thinking, how can you scale up right now your game? Because what you're doing, your product or service, is really working. And if you then have that, then think about it. Take a step back and think about it. What is your marketing plan? Where should I go? Who do I want to be in the next month, the next year? In the next, I would not say 3 years because you need to be adjustable, agile, because the market is so, volatile. But what is it? What is the budget you have, and where do you want to put it in which kind of bucket? Think about it. Do you have the right technology and processes in place? Do you have this automated playbook? Do you have, processes in place that you can automate? Your email marketing, every week, every month you're sending emails, you have these automations in place. Technology and connectivity is so important because it's such an important factor here in your equation. People, if you want to buy something, immediately, you need to have that platform to immediately have that payment in there. So make sure you have that. KPIs, everything you do, make sure it is tracked. And then, of course, make sure you have your scalers team. You have your scalers mindset. Being that scaler, but also being that entrepreneur. Roll up your sleeve, just do it. And everyone has the same mindset. And if you have that, you're a good success already. You're very good. And just one thing, 70% of all the startups fail. The reason? Premature scaling. They think they have it. They think, I have a product market fit that is working. But then, when you start scaling, they do on one hand a lot of marketing, advertising, a lot of demand is coming. But on the other side of the angle, they cannot deliver their products. It's too late. Customers are unhappy. A lot of customers, are asking, the product is not good, the service is not working. So just make sure your product marketing is okay and is working. And this is what Kotler is here for. The 4 P's: price, place, promotion, product. And then I think you also have promotion and personal. So these things, it has to be in place. Understand these things before you move on. If you have these, and if you feel, you have to start, you have really opportunity going on, then start with my 4 S's. And that is my secret. My 4 S's. It's not Kotler, but it's just the 4 S's. And it's having that scaler's team, that scaler's mindset, the desire to start scaling, to understand it as well. It's having that scalable strategy. If where do you want to go? What is my budget? And if it doesn't work out immediately, within 3 months, the market is different, the customers are demanding something different, make sure you are scalable to change, adaptable to change. What is your system and your processes in place? Can you scale them? Can you make, the right fit and the focus on them? Can you automate as much as possible without diluting your brand? And then, of course, success panel. Have a dashboard. Track everything that you're doing. Understand what is working and what is not working. And I think as Kotler also have one. I have one extra. And it's a very, very simple one. And it has a very simple one. It's for free. It's a smile. If you love what you're doing, then you have so much work in your job. Smile. Be that scaler that smiles. Roll up your sleeve. Just do it. But have a good time. Enjoy. Appreciate your people. Appreciate the things that you are doing. Have fun. So, last thing for me to say. Time to scale. Let me know if you have questions. I'm happy to answer them. Have a great one. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Mario Paschev, and today I'm going to talk about what is my secret weapon, or what's my key to success. There are a lot of things that determine success. Actually, some of them are also defined here because we're trying to remind a lot of these. Again, it's a tough process. It really requires a lot of persistence, a lot of grit, a lot of hustle to actually make it work. But in the grand scheme of things, what it really boils down to is one thing, and that one thing is called intrinsic motivation. When it comes to motivation, there are 2 types of motivation: intrinsic and extrinsic. The external type of motivation is external factors pushing you to do something. Your coach really pushing you through the last 2 reps at the gym, or finances that you just need to achieve something else, or again, a deadline that's just pressuring you to do something because there's no other way around it. These are the types of motivators that are not really sustainable, even though you can maintain them over a continuous period of time, but all of them are actually leading to something else you need, which may additionally be leading to something else you need. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is what really drives your value system. So building a value map around that before actually figuring out what success is is what really matters to me the most. That's what I'm looking for while doing interviews. That's what I'm looking for in my management team. Essentially, this is kind of what it boils down to. Why? Because figuring out your intrinsic motivation, or if you haven't figured it out yet, spending the time to define the key pillars of success for you, the value map that drives you forward, is by far the most powerful thing I've discovered that really helps me push forward. Because intrinsic motivation in itself is determining the reason one would be pushing forward in good and bad, and especially in bad during tough times, whenever something's really not going according to plan, whenever there's a pandemic, whenever there's something else. Again, it's really easy, everyone's happy, everything's running according to plan. When things are good, there's capital in the company, work's going fine, and so forth. But people really are put to a test when it comes to dealing with unbearable circumstances, when it comes to struggling and overtiming and working hard and dealing a lot and spending tons and tons of extra hours over a continuous period of time. Again, at the beginning, every startup, every relationship, everything is rainbows and unicorns. Everything looks great. The question is, what would make you quit? And on the contrary, what would make you stick forever, right? Understanding intrinsic motivation is by far the most important question to what would drive you forward and whether you're determined enough to aim towards success. I have several questions that I keep asking myself in order to verify or validate my intrinsic motivation. The first one is, what is the reason I started? When it comes to starting my business, the question is, what is the reason this company was started in the first place? This really drives me back to the old days of working for my last two employers and some of the management styles they had. So I said, well, I wasn't really comfortable with fixed business hours because this was not really I was passionate about, simply because we were actually working in different time zones with our clients. I wasn't really passionate into building in any type of technical stack because this really doesn't allow us to specialize and become the best at what we do. Wasn't really passionate about building moderately simple projects and reinventing the wheel every time with enterprise stack, even though that's not needed. There are a lot of other specific and more global or generic reasons that made me do what I did and made me start several companies over the past 12 years. But essentially, the main thing that brought me here is the main reason I keep pushing forward. And there are different ways to play around that. In certain cases, what drove you forward may need to evolve, may need to grow into something else, which is totally fine. This is why you can recalibrate your value map from time to time, and there's nothing wrong with it. You just need to understand, and whenever you're struggling, whenever you're suffering, just go back and say, okay, why am I doing this, right? And when you figure out what was the reason to start at, and when you recognize yourself for what you've achieved to date, that really makes a difference. Imagine you want to lose 20 or 30 or 40 pounds or kilograms, right? Even if you lose a third of it, instead of giving up, remember when you started, how you started, and the progress since. Without the initiative, you wouldn't have started and you wouldn't have achieved what you've achieved, even if it's not the complete picture, even if it's not the full plan of what you imagined to do. Second thing that I'm asking myself is, what do I want to innovate in? Am I making enough innovation in terms of what I care about? Because one of the main things that drives me forward is learning. I often refer to myself as a learnaholic. I love learning new things. And that's kind of one of the things that drives a lot of entrepreneurs as well. Because being a founder, being a senior executive means that you're responsible for a lot of people. You need to possess great management skills and leadership and negotiations. You need to understand marketing and sales. You need to understand how technology works. You deal with accounting and legal. You have to employ leadership best practices. So you're always learning. every single day. You're always stepping up. You're always poaching different problems into different industries. So learning is what really drives me forward. Because if I was not doing what I'm doing, I wouldn't be learning as much. If I wasn't working as hard as the way I'm working, I wouldn't be learning that fast. This is part of my intrinsic motivation. Every time I go back and do a time travel to a year back in time and figure out what I knew or what I did back then, I say, okay, it was worth it. If I go back 5 years in time or 10 years in time and remember what I've done back then, it was worth it. And I would rather move faster and deal with harder challenges simultaneously than just going with the flow in a corporate way, slowly but steadily, and learning just a couple of things over the course of a year. This is part of my intrinsic motivation. This may be different for yours, but again, what drives you forward is what you really care about. I'm not really thrilled about just millions of dollars or just growing a unicorn business or anything along those lines. That's just not my thing. But I have a lot of friends who are, and I really appreciate the way they perceive things. They do have a value map that's driven around money, and money are easier to quantify. So they just say, I need to make that much by this year, or I need to invest in this, or like in 3 years, I'm going to buy this building and I'm going to start an apartment suite or anything along those lines. So it's a different way to use your intrinsic motivation for financial standpoint. I have a lot of people who are passionate about charity, so they want to support this charity and they need money for that. And they say, I'm going to be an HR director at a large company if they offer me an opportunity to support this charity as much as possible and influence everyone else. People have different motivating factors. Some of those factors come through tragic stories of losing a loved one and deciding to commit your time into supporting an endeavor or charity, a clinic, or anything in order to stop others from falling into that specific scenario. So understanding, once again, your intrinsic motivation is extremely important to find out how to push forward, and everything you undertake, whether you're going to keep dealing with this continuously when things get rough. The other question that I ask myself is, what difference does it make? Because I don't want to deal with yet another vendor for doing something. And it's really tricky with businesses that are a commodity or businesses that just exist in loads and loads and loads of them. And since my agency also represents one of the tens of thousands of agencies out there dealing with a similar type of thing, we've pushed really hard to be a top 20 vendor in the space continuously for the past 4 years. And this really makes us be among the top 0.1% of vendors in the market. So in terms of commodity, what difference does it make? Means that our quality, our attention to detail, our results are a lot better. And by a lot, I mean better than 99.9% of everyone else in the market. We bridge the gap between the enterprise space and the small business by providing enterprise grade results at a lower cost for businesses that couldn't afford the enterprise results. So these are the specific factors that determine the USP, that determine the KPIs, that determine what really makes you successful and what really drives the business forward. If you always want to be excited about what you're doing, you need to keep your questions handy nearby and ask them every time you hit the rock bottom. And if you are actually running into the direction that matters to you, that is highly relevant to your intrinsic motivation, that's going to bring a lot more value. I like to always refer to other alternatives as something that really keeps you distracted. One of the biggest problems of our generation is having too many options. And as funny as it may sound, and I'm definitely not voting about communism as the grand ruler of the universe or anything, but the more options you have, the harder it is to choose. The more we're investing in consumerism, the more we face different challenges, the more we differentiate from the people close to one another, the harder it is to build more valuable connections. So everything has pros and cons, and we just need to recognize that. And in terms of business, if we are dealing with too many things, it's easier to drop the one thing we actually care about. So limiting our options makes us more focused and spending more time and effort and having more energy for the thing we deal with. There was a Spanish captain back in the day, and I don't really recall the year, but they were trying to take over an island, and they were vastly surrounded by a larger population of people, and a lot of the soldiers were not really passionate about that, to say the least. A lot of the soldiers wanted to go back. So once they landed on the island, once they saw what's coming up, they said, "Oh my God, I'm coming back. I really need to go back." And what the captain did back in the day is he commanded two of the archers to fire up and bring all their ships down and to put them on fire so they don't have a way back. This is a very powerful story because the way it ends is essentially the captain and the crew taking over the island and, acquiring ownership of the land. And the main reason behind that is having lack of options really doesn't leave you any chance of distracting yourself with anything else. Limiting your options as much as possible is something that really helps you be focused, achieve better results, be determined, and simply grind through whatever's coming up. One of the best ways to do that is, of course, incorporating different productivity strategies or different techniques, or joining a community or a mastermind to also employ external factors and also retrain your brain to be motivated. Seinfeld, who's a famous producer and actor, has actually invented a strategy called Don't Break the Chain, which is as simple as ticking off progress for something you do every single day. Just get a regular calendar and tick off every single day you do something. The longer the chain becomes, the harder it is to break it. Imagine you've had a short run on the beach for 98 days in a row. And you wake up one morning, you haven't slept very well, the weather isn't great. Are you going to break the chain if you're that close to 100? Are you going to break that chain and start all over if you have 98 days repeating the same thing over and over again? This type of motivation, this type of excuse, or like if you work with an external coach and you have to send them a video every single day, if you have KPIs you need to keep and you're the only one that doesn't keep these promises, those are a lot of semi-external factors that are also going to help you persevere. But again, at the end of the day, we need to think of what we really care about. We need to think about our intrinsic motivation. If we don't understand the intrinsic motivation well enough, we just need to sit down and figure it out. I do have these sessions every 3 years or so, just trying to recalibrate my value map, challenge the assumptions against I'm working with, and make sure that I have a core value map that's solid enough as axioms in mathematics that I can build on top of. So if you aren't there yet, spend the time yourself and make sure you understand your intrinsic motivation. If what you're doing builds on top of the intrinsic motivation, then great. The odds of dropping it are really small and you can push through almost anything.
Hi, and welcome to today's session about reaching your ideal customers through podcast guesting. My name is Mark Colgan, and I have around 13 years experience in B2B sales and marketing. And in the last year, my team and myself have booked almost 1,000 podcast interviews for our customers. So in today's session, I'm going to cover 3 main learning outcomes. The first, just talking about the benefits of speaking on podcasts. The second, about how to find and pitch relevant podcasts for you. And the third is how to deliver an exceptional podcast interview. We only have 15 to 20 minutes to go through this, so I will be quick, but hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have exactly what you need in order to book your first podcast interview. But why podcasts? There's actually over 4 million podcasts live on Apple at the moment. Now, a lot of these podcasts don't last too long, so the actual real number of podcasts, which is an opportunity for you to speak on, is a lot smaller than this, but it's still in the hundreds of thousands. And why podcasts as a channel from a marketing point of view? Well, first of all, it allows you to build credibility. You get to leverage somebody else's audience. It's a really high value touch point, especially if you have a complex service or solution where you really need to explain what it is. You can do that by telling stories and customer anecdotes as well. You'll often find that the audience is extremely loyal and they're quite niche as well. So if you go on a podcast, which is called the HR Leadership Podcast, then you know that the majority of the audience are going to be HR leaders. One podcast I went on in specific was called Outbound Metrics, all about cold email, which is a domain of expertise that I also have knowledge in as well. So you find that there's a real niche, loyal audience, and they're often there to learn, and they're looking for solutions to their challenges and problems, which is a really, really great touch point to speak to them on. It's great for SEO. A lot of the podcasts have show notes and they link back to your website. It also creates a ton of content for you to repurpose as well. So you can turn one podcast interview into many different pieces of content. I'll share a little bit more about that later in this session. And also it gives you the opportunity to build real credibility. You're speaking on somebody else's show where they've invited you on it. So it's third-party social proof, a little bit like the popular review sites like G2 Crowd and Capterra. Speaking on other people's podcasts means that it's not you making up stuff about how great you are. You're just on there telling your story, talking about your experience, talking about the challenges that you help customers overcome and the outcomes that they get, and you're able to leverage that other person's audience. So there's 3 main options when it comes to podcasts. You can advertise on podcasts, you can speak on podcasts, and also you can host your own. For the interest of time, I'm only going to be talking about speaking. However, this is one that I believe is the best strategy for people because it requires the least amount of time and it has the biggest potential return of investment. All you essentially need to do once you've done the initial work to research, outreach, and turn up for the interview is just talk for 30, 45 minutes. And then the rest is done for you in the sense that the podcast host will share the link when it goes live to the episode and share that with their community. So when it comes to thinking about speaking on podcasts, the main thing that I could really summarize in one slide is to think of this equation. You've got your audience plus your topics times your competitors and influencers equal your ideal podcast that you want to reach out to. So when it comes to the audience, what you need to think about is who do you want to be speaking to? If you're standing up on a stage at an industry conference, who are the people in the room that you want to be talking to? When it comes to your topics, we often suggest finding 3 to 4 topics that you can discuss and sharing that as potential options for the podcast host. When you're thinking of your topics, a lot of people say to us that they're not sure what they can talk about, but really what's obvious to you is often amazing to other people. So with your topics, you should think about what are your area of expertise? What are the common questions that you get asked by customers or prospects? And what controversial opinions do you have? Now, when I say controversial, I'm not talking about politics, religion, race, or anything like that. I'm talking more about industry-specific opinions. For me, one of my controversial opinions is I don't believe there should be forms that gate content on your website, and especially if you have case studies, you should not hide that behind a form. You should allow your prospects to read and consume that information, and if they're ready to reach out to you, they will. That's just an example of a controversial topic for me. When we're talking about times your competitors or influencers, there are likely going to be many people that speak to the same audience as you. So it's a good idea to have a look to see what podcasts they've been on before, and also have a look at what podcasts your competitors have been on as well, and try and get on those shows too. What you can do, and the reason why we say this is the hypothesis, is that if they've done their due diligence and done their research, they may have identified that these are good podcasts for you to reach out to. When you're thinking about the goal of speaking on podcasts, it really is a brand building campaign. It's a PR campaign. Whilst you can generate leads and generate sales from speaking on podcasts, it's a long-term play. So you do need to go in it with the right mindset and objectives. Does size matter? Is a question I get asked quite often. When it comes to podcast audiences, I believe the answer is it depends. Really, podcasts are all about relevancy. You want to make sure that you are speaking to podcasts where your ideal audience is already listening to. If that means that there's only 400 listeners, but they're 400 extremely qualified prospects for you, it's still a good use of your time. You can't compare this to paid ads, to other sort of lead generation strategies. This is a brand building campaign, so focus on the relevancy above all else. When it comes to research, there are many things that you need to look at. I'll keep it very brief and simple. The first thing you need to look at is to see if they accept guests. Have they interviewed other people in the past? Have they released an interview in the last month? There are lots of podcasts out there that were live, but they're no longer open. So you want to make sure that this is a current podcast so that they are accepting guest suggestions. And as I mentioned before, think about your ideal customer. You're on a stage talking in front of them. Who do you want to be in that room? Have a look at the podcast description. Have a look at the previous guests. Have a look at the topics that they've been talking about in the past. And this will help you determine whether it's the right podcast for you and whether the host is going to be interested in speaking to you as well. There are a number of tools out there. You can simply Google search. You can look at the Spotify apps or Apple or Google Podcasts. But there are podcast-specific websites that you can check out. One of them is called matchmaker.fm. The other one is listennotes.com. Both have free versions, so you can go on there, maybe secure your first interview through them, and then decide whether it's something that you want to pay for. I personally believe it's worth the investment. And also, when you are on the podcast databases like Matchmaker or Listen Notes, then you may want to type in your competitor's name or some industry influencers to see which podcasts they've been on recently. When it comes to outreach, this is the most important step of the overall process. I'm going to focus first of all on the initial email, then I'm going to talk about follow-ups. With the initial email, you need to detach yourself from the outcome. Of course, you're emailing so you can get interviewed on their podcast, but really the purpose of that first email is just to get a reply from the host. You want to make sure that you highly customize that email and reach out to the host explaining why you believe that you have something relevant to talk about that their audience would be interested in. The majority of podcast hosts are doing this to provide value to their audience. So you want to make sure that your messaging when you reach out to the podcast host makes it as simple as possible for them to understand that. I would recommend listening to an episode or two before you do so, and maybe find somebody who's talked about a similar topic before on their podcast and make note of that and say that your topic can build upon what they said. It's a really great way to demonstrate that you've done your research and you're not just spamming hundreds of podcast hosts at one time. With your call to action, you just want a reply. So ask them if they're interested in finding out more. Don't send your meeting link. Don't assume that they want to interview you. Just ask if they believe that the topics that you've mentioned would be of interest to their audience. That's the initial email. Like I said, you just want a reply, but we're all busy. Inboxes are overwhelmed. I think more and more every year we get busier inboxes. I get hundreds of emails a week. So you do need to follow up. Just because somebody hasn't replied to you doesn't mean that they didn't think that you were interesting or didn't think that you would make a great guest on their show. They're just simply busy or they've missed it. So in your follow-up process, make sure that you send 3 to 4 follow-up emails and further demonstrate the value that you can share with your audience. Maybe you can share about your newsletter list and your plans for promoting the episode once it goes live. Maybe you can share a different podcast interview that you've done in the past, which then helps them understand how you're going to be as a guest. Add that credibility into the follow-up. It will make the decision easier for the podcast host to make. We also suggest putting together a media kit. So your media kit contains information such as a bio, images of you, your social proof, so previous podcast interviews or previous webinars that you may have done. Maybe you've been featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur, or on some other industry websites. Make sure you include those logos in your media kit. You also want to prepare your topics. With your topics, think about the anecdotes and stories that you can tell to really expand upon those topics as well, and make it very easy for the podcast host to contact you. Now, you can create a PDF. On the screen, you'll see that we've got a website or a landing page, but what I recommend at the bare minimum is send a PDF. But it's 2021 when we're recording this, and PDFs are a little bit old school. So if you have the capacity to do so, create a landing page, copy this template and framework, and it will certainly work for you. So let's say that you've sent the email, you've got the response from the podcast host. Now what do you need to do? We always recommend that you do a pre-interview conversation with the podcast host. In that conversation, usually led by the podcast host, they'll talk about the logistics of the show, how it's going to be set up. Is it going to be video recorded? Is it just audio? Are there going to be an introductory sentence that you have to say, or the host do the intro? All of these things can be found out before the podcast, and it makes the actual interview a lot more less stressful and a little bit easier for you because you know what to expect. Oftentimes, podcast hosts will have set questions that they want to go through, and most podcast hosts will kind of go off script a little bit depending on what you say. I think the most important thing to remember is don't worry, don't overthink this. Just look at it as you're having a conversation over coffee with somebody who's interested in what you have to say. And also, once you have got that confirmed interview booked, just send an email to the podcast host before the interview is actually going to be held and say, hey, Susan, really looking forward to being on your podcast. If there's anything I can do in addition to prepare, please do let me know. Anyway, speak to you soon. Small little touch, but they go a very, very long way. Then you have the interview yourself. It's now crunch time. You have to turn up and deliver the value that you promised in your outreach and from the pre-interview conversation. Practice, practice, practice. That's my most important tip for when it comes to interviewing on podcasts. Make sure you know the stories, make sure you know the examples, make sure that you've got anecdotes and you're prepared. I strongly recommend listening to some previous interviews before you go on this podcast, because you don't want to be caught out by any quick fire rounds at the end, a quick fire round of questions at the end. It's personally happened to me. I'm never going to let that happen again. So think about the challenges that you can help your customers overcome and examples of when you've done so. It's really important not to pitch your product or service on the interview. Of course, you can allude to it. Of course, you can tell customer stories, but don't make it a 30 to 40 minute or an hour conversation of you just pitching about how amazing you are. Tell them your mistakes. Tell them the lessons learned. People are really looking to connect with humans. We buy from humans. And at the end of the day, even in 2021, people still make decisions on emotion and not on logic. And they want to work with good people. They want to work with that trusted advisor. And that's where speaking on podcasts can really, really help you increase that credibility and become that trusted advisor in your industry. Before the end of the podcast, you want to make sure that you have a very strong call to action. We recommend that you direct people to a specific landing page that they may be able to learn a little more about you, or maybe have some access to some content, join your newsletter subscriber, or you can simply say follow you on LinkedIn. It really does depend on you and what you have set up and the capacity that you have to build out these to build out your marketing. But just make sure you practice your call to action. It might feel a little bit silly at first in the mirror, but practice makes perfect. And the more you practice, the more you'll be prepared for the interview. And like I said, you can just go there, have a chat about your domain expertise over coffee. That's the mindset that you really want to have. Okay, post-interview. So you've done the hard work, but it doesn't end there. You definitely want to follow up with the host. Thank them for their time, and also ask them when the interview is going to go live. Different hosts will have different schedules in terms of when the interview will be recorded, edited, and then published. So ask the question, ask them how you can help. How can you help promote the interview once it goes live? When that interview does actually go live, then you've got an opportunity to repurpose this content. From a 30 to 45-minute conversation, that's if you transcribe that video or interview, you've easily got around 4,000 to 5,000 words. You can edit that down into a 2,000 to 3,000 word blog post, for example, and then repurpose the blog post content into smaller snippets for social media. So from one interview, you can create one blog post. You could create 10 social media images. You could create 5 or 6 videos if it was video recorded, or audiograms if you just have the audio. And then you can obviously create the accompanying social media posts to go with that content and those assets that you've shared. Other things that you can do with this content is you can put it into your email newsletter and send it to your prospects or your customers. You can use it in your pipeline. So if you have a sales team, you can give them the content to share with prospects in their pipeline. We've even got customers who run paid ads to the interviews that they've been on, especially on the more notable shows, or the shows that they've really found that they had some great chemistry with a podcast host and it was a great conversation. But don't forget to distribute that content. And if you are creating these assets, share it back with the podcast host. There are many ways that you can continue the relationship with the podcast host, and that's just one idea. When it comes to tracking conversions, a lot of people ask me about this. And I have to be honest with you, you're not going to be able to track 100% of the conversions from your podcast interviews. Some people listen to podcasts as they're driving, as they're running, maybe even as they're showering or cooking or walking. They're not always going to be in front of a computer. So you're not going to get 100% of the tracking of an attribution point of view. However, there are a couple of ways from a qualitative point of view and a quantitative. So from a qualitative point of view, you can ask people when you speak to them or when your sales team is speaking to them, how did they hear about you? And they may mention that they heard you on a podcast. So you can have those conversations with people, or if you've got forms on your website, make sure that you have a how did you hear about us, and it has a podcast option, so you can start to see the benefits of speaking on podcasts. If you're looking at a simple way of tracking this, create one landing page, which is very specific to only the podcast interviews that you're doing. And you can give out that link at the end of the interview in your call to action. So it might be, for example, yourdomain.com/strategy. And you only talk about that link on podcasts. Again, you can see that the logic is a little bit flawed because still people could stumble across that website through SEO, through that landing page through SEO, but it will still give you an indication of the impact of your podcast interviews. From an advanced point of view, you could set up individual landing pages for each interview that you record. So for example, it could be yourdomain.com/the B2B marketing show. And that's where you direct people to. And then therefore you can see how many visitors your page gets after that interview goes live. But there is a long tail benefit of speaking on podcasts. There will be people discovering this content, discovering your interview years in the future. I was recently contacted on LinkedIn from a podcast interview that went out 2 years ago, and they were asking me questions about the topics that I was talking about 2 years ago, which was in fact for a different business. So I wasn't actually able to help them, but I was able to point them in the right direction. Another thing that you could do from a attribution point of view, especially if you're direct to consumer or B2C, you can create specific coupon codes for each podcast interview that you go on. One of our customers has a supplements business. He gives a free $5 voucher off people's first orders, and he gives a specific code for each interview that he goes on. And that way he can track how many sales that he generates from each interview. So there you have it. We've talked about the benefits of speaking on podcasts, how to find and how to reach out to podcast hosts, and how to prepare for that interview, and some of the things that you need to do after the interview goes live. I hope this gives you a good taster of the benefits of speaking on podcasts. And all I leave it is up to you is to go and follow the information that I've shared, reach out to that first podcast host and book yourself on a show. You will not regret it. My name is Mark Colgan. Once again, thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to potentially meeting you in the future. Take care.
Hello, digital marketers. My name is Tiffany Shreen, and I want to thank you for joining me in today's session called Playing the Game of Digital Marketing. I'm extremely excited to be presenting this presentation to you all. It's really been a very, very rough time, a rough 18 months, if you will, for those of us who are a little bit familiar with traditional media and the role that it kind of plays in digital media. We really got to see an opportunity of a huge share of dollar shifts towards the first quarter of 2020. And we really got to be able to be a bit innovative, if you will, on how we can help clients with their digital dollars meet customer demands and find out how we can acquire different customers in different ways, whether we were going through digital or whether we were going through social. It was really, really an interesting time, I think, in the world of media and marketing and advertising, putting all of them under one umbrella, if you will, to sort of get everything, in a position where we can really figure out what is the best way moving forward. And if I want to add something else, 2020 definitely as I always like to say, it kind of cut out the idea of the set it and forget it mentality, which we're going to talk about a little bit in this presentation today, where we as agency people, or, if you're a client and you're working with agency people, you're seeing the same media campaign and media strategy year over year. Now, after we were kind of pushed into creating a new campaign and a new strategy for a total of 18 months, we can now see all of the different things that one can do with digital, and we can really take it up a notch in year 2 and year 3 and year 4 to kind of really get an understanding of how well we can create a campaign to meet goals and meet budget and meet those customers where they are. So really excited today to talk about some things that I kind of pulled out over the last 18 months, but really just an overarching thing in general of how we can effectively play the game of digital marketing and be able to create a more effective campaign. So who am I? My name is Tiffany K. Shreen. I am president of Optilytics Media. It is a small boutique marketing, advertising, and data analytics firm. I kind of married a lot of different things in building this firm together. I have a 10-year background in working with advertising agencies and traditional marketing as well as digital marketing and executing advertising campaigns. And then I have a brief background, not that brief, but a brief background in working in media analytics and really being able to work with agencies, but work directly for clients to get them to understand based off of, agencies' campaign execution, their dollars, and how they managed your overall campaign. Was it effective? Was it not? And it was kind of an interesting mix for those of you who are not familiar with auditing and media analytics and how that can work. But it was really interesting because essentially, if you're a data person like myself, you collect all of this information and all of this data, and you start creating these benchmarks to really get an understanding of, how one client performed versus another client, and be able to glean insights from those different campaigns to help clients moving forward. So I wanted to be able to build a company that kind of looks at advertising, looks at marketing strategy, but also considers the analytics of it all, and really have the analytics, if you will, inform the campaign, inform the advertising strategy. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today too, of what I've learned over the last few years. And then finally, the highlight of my life, the glowing point of my life, if you will. I am a marketing and small business entrepreneur professor with Borough of Manhattan Community College, as well as an advertising professor with the Fashion Institute of Technology. So today, our session content, albeit brief, I think is necessary. We're going to discover 3 things. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Methodology Playbook, which is absolutely one of my favorite things to discuss because essentially it's almost like your phone card, if you will. It's almost the one thing that for so many years advertisers and marketers did not pay attention to. And now a lot of advertisers and marketers are really looking at that Methodology Playbook and really being able to assess what is important and what is not. The second thing we're going to talk about is practice makes perfect. I think the saying is, if you want to go to Carnegie Hall, it requires practice, practice, practice. So we're going to talk about that a bit. And then we're going to talk about why content will always be king and queen. It's going to be important for some of you. So let's talk about the playbook first. Merriam-Webster defines the term playbook as one or more plays in book form. A notebook, second definition, a notebook containing diagrammed football plays. And then the third definition, a stock of usual tactics or methods. I cannot count on 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 pairs of hands how many clients will step into an agency and say, we have all of these dollars. These are our products. This is what our typical target audience is. Make some magic happen. And typically, we only wish that it would work that well. We only wish that we could just essentially just kind of snap our fingers and be able to sort of make some sort of play work. But essentially, what agencies, the one key thing, the killer thing that a lot of agencies can walk away with, if they haven't done this already, and something they can look forward to doing in the future years, is really pull together a methodology playbook. This methodology playbook should provide the following: the different types of marketing, whether you have paid search, digital display, content, what are the different types of digital marketing? All of them, okay? And I would highly suggest for those of you who had to throw a lot of dollars into digital marketing and into social marketing in 2020 to really go back and look at every single thing that you did and then add things onto there, things that you didn't even think about. Add things onto there because you want to be able to house all of that data, all of that information in one place. The second thing the playbook does is it provides different types of strategies to achieve content marketing goals, digital marketing goals, social goals, whatever those cases may be. Maybe you want more page views. Maybe you want more clicks. Maybe you want subscriptions and sales. You want to be able to have what are the different types of strategies to achieve each of those different goals. And then finally, you want to house all of the different key performance indicators that helps us gauge performance in one place. So let me repeat all of these things. The first thing that the Methodology Playbook does is it houses every single type of marketing strategy available, every single type of marketing channel available. So whether we're talking paid search, digital display, social, every single social and digital marketing type should be in one book, one area for you, whether you want to make this a automated book or however you want to form the book, a composition notebook, whatever you want to form the book, but it all should be in one place. On top of that, you want to have the different plays, the different strategies. Look at my second bullet up there at the top, talking about Merriam-Webster in the playbook, a notebook containing diagram football plays. For every single achievement that a football team wants to make, every single goal they want to make, there is a diagram play for that goal. That's the same thing we should be doing for our second bullet below with the different types of strategies to achieve the different types of marketing goals. You want to be able to make sure that you're understanding the goal, you understand what you need to do to get to that goal, and have several different plays, several different technology techniques and strategies, if you will, to be able to get to that goal. And then third and final, the different key performance indicators. What are the different ways that we can measure effectiveness? That is always going to be important. You want to be able to make sure that whatever methodologies you have in play, whatever KPIs you have in play, they answer the goal. Obviously, if the goal is number of downloads and you have a high number of downloads that you want to meet, you obviously probably aren't going to want to check social media clicks, unless those clicks are in some way, form, or fashion connected to those downloads. So you want to be able to make sure that the key performance indicators, how you're measuring the effectiveness of your digital marketing strategy, is going to be essential in with the type of marketing campaign that you run. So all of these things, we want to house those in the Methodology Playbook so that everything is in one place. Secondly, practice makes perfect. As I mentioned, you talk about going to Carnegie Hall. What are the things that they always tell you? Practice. Goals are something that we're never just going to get rid of. We need to keep the goal in mind when we are talking about marketing strategy. One thing that I'm going to call out, that's the third bullet point on this slide, but it kind of aids in keeping that goal in mind, is you want to monitor. And I cannot count on, I don't know how many times that I've mentioned, we have to monitor things on a regular cadence. You need to make sure that when you are looking at these benchmarks and you're looking at how well your performance is going, you want to make sure that you're looking at it effectively. One suggestion, one key that I've had in mind that's really worked over the last year, or really more than a year for me, is being able to identify new clients with new opportunities and say, okay, if we're creating new benchmarks, my suggestion would be that we monitor for the first 4 weeks, then we monitor again the next 4 weeks, then we monitor again the next 4 weeks. You have to kind of keep in mind customer journey. You have to keep in mind user behavior. These things can be a bit funny and they can change, especially if you are new into the digital fold and you have a new client into the digital fold, and you need to be able to establish those benchmarks and establish, exactly what it is they're looking to achieve, if you will. You want to be able to make sure that you're monitoring performance in the most effective manner so that you're not looking at things too close to the belt, but you're also not looking at things way far off. You want to kind of keep that in mind. And then finally, as I mentioned in the previous slide, key performance indicators. As you are creating the digital measurement strategy or the digital marketing plan, this is something that I will always say. The digital media strategy needs to be created at the same time. Again, the second you start creating your digital marketing plan, the digital measurement strategy should be created at the same time. There have been so many times that agencies in general have waited until after creating the digital marketing plan or after the digital media plan has been running, and then all of a sudden decides to kind of throw a bunch of metrics together and say, we're going to measure this, and this, when it's really important to start measuring things from the beginning of time to make sure that, number one, you have everything set up. If you're in Google Analytics every day, like I am, or in Google Search Console every day, like I am, I think you can kind of understand the goal of making sure that you have all that stuff done up front. It would not be good to find out, 2 or 3 days before it's time to execute the initial reporting that your website is not connected to your digital analytics or whatever you're using to measure and monitor analytics for your digital site. That's not going to be good. So make sure that as you are creating the digital marketing plan, you were subsequently, or really not really subsequently, at the same time, creating that digital measurement strategy. And then the final strategy, content is king and queen. Content is one of the most important powers to digital marketing. The number one reason, really both of them are number one. Let's kind of go with 1A. 1A, thought leadership leads to brand awareness. For those of you who are SEO people, like I like to fancy myself as one, for those of you who are trying to figure out ways to get more people to your client's website, or even if it's your own website, thought leadership, creating pieces, whether you're guest blogging, whether you are using your social, whether you are blogging on your own website, making sure that those keywords are being used and across all those content pieces, those help establish brand awareness. That's all content. That's the reason why content will always be king and queen, because additionally, communication. In any relationship, I don't care if you're talking about your husband, your wife, your kids, your coworkers, communication is key. Communication on websites and social media channels, because this is the way that brands communicate with their target audience. Websites and social media channel. Communication is key. Clearly stating what do you do, clearly stating how you can help, clearly stating how you can solve the problem. So keep that in mind. Why content is king, and why do we say that so often? Why is it queen, and why do we say that so often? Because these things help lead people to our brands, our clients. So definitely keep that in mind as you're building everything out. Finally, I want to leave you guys today with some marketing KPIs to consider. This is one of my favorite things to do when I get done with the presentation. And it's something that, as I mentioned, digital marketing is such a measured ability. And I really love it for that reason, because you have the ability to see what does work, what doesn't work. It tells you in real time, and I love it. It's like a kid in a candy store for me. These KPIs that I'm presenting to you today can be found on SEMrush, which is for those of you who are SEO people and you're measuring backlinks and authority links and things like that. You're probably very familiar with this platform. Most of these KPIs that I have here can be measured either through your brand social media platform, if you're using Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram have a really great social media analytics platform in the background. Google Analytics, Hootsuite, MailChimp, all of these different platforms that offer analytics as a component. You can find a lot of these KPIs through here. Social shares are very important. You want to get an understanding of how your communication socially is working with your audience, traffic to your website. Make sure your content is working for you. Make sure those keywords are working for you. Customer retention. Are people coming back? Typically, you're going to find customer retention typically has a very high time on page rate than new users. And primarily because when people are coming back to your website, they know what they're looking for. So maybe they're going through a purchase funnel or things that kind of extend that time a little bit more. Click-through rate, obviously a number one thing that a lot of brands and clients look for on their website. Any type of post engagement, positive, negative, you want to kind of keep an eye out for those negative post engagements and make sure that that's not being too many negative things are being said about you, but you want to make sure that your posts and your social media are getting enough reach. Bounce rate is something that I always say it's kind of tricky to check, but if you're checking bounce rate, you should also be checking a metric that is called time or page speed. Essentially, if you see that a page speed is running very slow on a specific page and you see the bounce rate is very high, there's your answer. That means that people are bouncing off of that page because it's taking so long to load. So keep that in mind if you're looking at bounce rate. And then finally, email opt-in rates. For those of you who are doing email campaigns, you want to make sure that you're seeing a high number of subscribers joining your email campaigns and things of that nature. So what are we remembering here? What are these key steps? Creating that methodology playbook, that's going to help all digital marketing strategy efforts. You want to create a digital marketing strategy and measurement plan with the goal of the strategy in mind. What is the goal? Keep that in mind as you're creating that strategy. And then finally, content powers your agency. That digital footprint includes content that frames thought leadership, such as blogs and white papers, and also the communication to your agency's clients, such as your website and your social media channel. These are huge in making sure that your content is really remaining top of mind for everyone. I want to thank you all so very much for joining me today. This has been a load of fun. I hope you guys are having an amazing time. Go across all the different conferences. Please, I have all ways of contacting me here, whether you want to go through my Optilytics, my company Twitter page, my company LinkedIn page, or if you want to contact me directly. Everything is Tiffany Shreen. It's a very hard name to spell, so you may want to take a screenshot of this so that you can keep it. But you can find me at Tiffany Shreen at Twitter, and as well as Tiffany K. Shreen at LinkedIn.com at LinkedIn. Thank you so much. I hope you guys are staying safe. Be well. I'll talk to you soon.
Hi everyone, it is a great pleasure to be with you in this event. My secret weapon in marketing management started with a dream to achieve new horizons, and has to be with experimentation and learning. This history started 10 years ago. On 2010, I received a proposal to be the new Chief Marketing Officer of an internet service provider. The challenge was to build from the scratch the brand, the market, the product for a fiber optic network. It was very challenging because the internet service market was mature. There was 5 big internet service providers already in the market, all of them with many years of trajectory and a lot of money for advertisement. On the other hand, we have no brand awareness, almost none budget for advertising. We were unknown, and our service was a premium price starting 60% above of our competitors. And the name of this dream was NetLife, a digital connection for life. How can it be possible to take this dream and make NetLife the #1 brand in the market? Even more, how can it be possible to achieve the #1 position in sales, since our price was high to compare with the volume of the competitors? Let me tell you that it was possible. It was a David against Goliath. And once again, my secret weapon to achieve this was the following. add a meaningful purpose. We build a team, we build our teamwork based on deep and big purpose. It means we pretend to resolve something else that only have successful in the market. We want to improve the quality of our customers with a connection to the digital world. Just a team who work hard with blood, sweat, and tears for a higher purpose just want to work for the paycheck. It is the first thing to do and is very important. Maybe somebody can think it is not so relevant, but it is, and you have to pay serious attention to that purpose and build it with your team. It will be the difference. Now, the second thing, it was define a long-term competitive advantage. It is not possible to transform anything without a long-term competitive advantage. We started with the purpose, and then we have to define that long-term competitive advantage. In our case, we already had it. It was a fiber optics network. It was the first one in his class in the country. We live in Ecuador, so at 2010, there wasn't any internet service provider offering internet service based on fiber optics network. There was only copper cable services, but not a fiber optics network. So we started at the second place with that long-term competitive advantage. It helped us a lot because we started with that network to innovate the category, innovate the marketing, innovate the market, sorry. Then the third thing that we do was thinking that done is better than perfect. Agility, perhaps the fact of build the marketing structure of the company from the scratch help us to build an agile structure. No many processes, no many steps to get things done. As a mantra, I said, done is better than perfect. But also, we learn how to develop a complete market research in only 1 week. You know that a traditional market research takes almost 2 months to bring results. But bringing agility and using digital tools for our researching, we achieve a marketing research results in only 1 week. It helped us a lot because even it was not perfect, it has a big light to the path we have to walk. The next thing that we did was take a great understanding of the consumer and the environment. You know, if you know more of your consumer, his needs, his pains, his desires, it will help you a lot to develop best things, best service, and best value offers. We always test our creativity concepts, our campaigns, our ads with the target. Whether I like it or not was not relevant. Relevant is what the market thinks. Give the power to the market, and they will take you to the right path. I do not mean that the brand position should be made with the customers, but a great understanding lets you define better your customers, lets you define better your marketing strategy, lets you define better your assets and your brand position. In our case, we assess constantly what our market feels, how it goes, the purchasing power of the consumer, how is the offer and the demand, how is the competitive situation of the competitors, how is the competitive situation of the products, and so on. So we are always understanding, learning, knowing more about our environment and our customers, our consumers. So that is important to do, and it requires agility in order to take the fewer time possible to know that information. The next thing is measure. Measuring the impact of the media advertising, that is very important. Since our goal was to get brand awareness, we started to measure cost per mile, setting a standard to buy in every media and cost per sale in online, but also in offline media. You know that measure cost per sale in offline media is not so easy, but asking to our new sales, to our new customers, what channels do they saw or advertising, it brings us great insights to know what media works good and what kind of media we should cut off. And we have to measure all the time. But also we have to define what is important to measure, what indicators do we have to measure, and we have to get the flexibility to change the indicators when it is necessary. Then, the next thing is fulfill the value offer. We give the market just what we offer. I know that it looks an obvious thing, but it's not so obvious and it's not so easy. We have to connect and match perfectly our advertising to what we bring to the customer. Even more, we have to check very well what we bring to the customer in order to bring them over satisfaction, bring them more satisfaction, more than they were expecting. So fulfill the value offer in order to achieve word of mouth is a powerful tool. Once again, the only way to measure this is doing a market research, a very fast, very agile, very flexible marketing and market research. We have built a great set of market studies that keep us receiving critical information about the fulfill of the value offer every time we can and as fast as we can. The next thing we implement every time is never stop experiment and learn. You know, it's like a laboratory. We always think that we are in laboratory, experimenting all the time, checking many things, many variables to changing, and checking what are the results. Also, every check, every change, everything that we do in that experiment, it helps us to learn more about the consumer. It was very important to get things right and get great results. Then, let me say something. What people think about innovation is not about future, it's not about technology. It is about thinking different. And thinking different means to be always learning and experimenting. We now are the biggest service provider in the country. Our sales have a huge volume, more than the other service providers. And even our price is 60% above of the competitors' price. We have a lot of customers wanting to come with us because we are giving them a better quality of life in order to achieve our mission, our purpose, even in a crisis situation. So that are my secret weapons. Thank you very much to be with me in this presentation, and see you on the media. Please follow me. Bye.
Welcome. Today we will be covering practical content marketing and how to build content at scale. Here's just a little bit about me. My name is Corey Kevin Brown. I'm the head of marketing for Risk 360. Risk 360 is a cybersecurity and privacy firm based out of Metro Atlanta. We help high-tech growth companies with their privacy and security needs. Before joining Risk 360, I worked at Atlanticus. Atlanticus is a second look credit provider here in Atlanta. I was the director of B2B marketing, communications, and marketing operations. Before that, I was the head of content and digital marketing for GreenSky. So when I go into any organization, from the beginning, I look at these four things. I figure out what the strategy needs to be, what we're actually going to do, and what we're not going to do. I look at the process, like how we're actually going to create things, and like how fast we're going to create them. And then I look at the people, like who do we need to hire, who do we need to develop to execute on these strategies, these processes. And then lastly, I look at the metrics. I looked at how we're actually doing, what we can improve upon, and how we actually can make things better based on data. And then I look at technology, which I include with the metrics because they're one and the same to me, what technology we can use to improve upon what we're trying to do. So when it comes to content marketing, it's very important to realize that there's a funnel driving the content. Most organizations that I've worked with throughout my career have not really understand the content funnel. They are either creating content that is at a very high level. They're either creating content that's at the top of the funnel that's just short and simple, but they don't have anything that actually explains and show their thought leadership. And they miss a lot of the points that we need to do in order to get people through the funnel. So let's take a look at what a content funnel should look like. So at the top of the funnel, you need to create short, sweet, and simple content. These are blog posts, these are articles, these are videos. They help loosen the status quo with your user base. The middle of the funnel is really for people who are trying to commit to change. inside their organizations, their longer blog posts, their webinars, their video summaries, their explainers. These are the types of content that they're looking for. They're looking at. When people are at the bottom of the funnel, before you can get to them with the sales, you probably need to start giving them gated content, as well as marketing emails that actually show them the content that they should be looking at, as well as inviting them to attend more detailed webinars. And personalized account-based marketing efforts need to be used there too. All that is all content driven. So if you do these different steps, it's a good chance that you'll actually have a very successful funnel. Most organizations have issues figuring out the funnel, what content they need to create. Either creating a lot of mid of the funnel content and they're not have any top of the funnel content, or they're just doing webinars, or they're only focused on the top of the funnel and they're creating a bunch of short blog posts and not figuring out like why they can't get people to fill out a form or get people to actually talk to them. But we have so many different views on our website. So this is like the strategy that I've used when I build out a funnel, the types of content that I want to create for that funnel. And it's been very successful so far in my career. So let's get into the content pillar approach. So when you look at all that content that was on that previous slide, you start going like, wow, that's a lot of content we have to create. How do we create this at scale? How can we repeat this? How can we have something that we know that we can go back to and make sure we're creating good content and then delivering it for every part of the funnel? So I always like to go with a content pillar approach. So what is a content pillar? A content pillar is really just a very lengthy piece of content that you spend some time to actually develop. Good examples are ebooks and white papers, even reports or guides. A lot of times you would need support from your subject matter experts inside your company, and even your leadership, because it might take a while to create, but it'll be worth the time and effort that you put into it if you use it as a pillar. So if you have any ebooks or white papers that you've developed and you're trying to figure out like, all right, we sent out one email blast around it, what happens now? We used it in one campaign, like what else can we do with this? Now is a good time for you to start thinking about it as a content pillar. In my previous roles, I've used content pillars to create hundreds of pieces of content off of really just one long effort. So a good example is when I was at Green Sky, we created an ebook dedicated to helping people grow. And from the ebook, we ended up creating 6 blog posts, which we shared on social many times. We created an infographic, which we created a blog post on. It's shared on social. We even had a SlideShare account that we put a lot of content in. We created videos based on that content pillar, and then we shared those on YouTube, and then we shared it across social media, as well as creating blog posts around it. We did an email blast campaign, and then we first published it to send it out to people. But then we ended up building out 3 more email campaigns related just to that email content pillar. And then we also created a PowerPoint presentation, which turned into a webinar, which turned into its own forms of content. So one piece of content that you spend a lot of time and effort in can then turn into your social media strategy. It can turn into your blogging strategy. It can turn into your video strategy, just because you took time to actually research and develop out a lengthy piece of content that was worth people filling out a gate for and understanding, and also, being able to repurpose that piece of content repeatedly through the process. So here's just a little information on content pillars. I've used them successfully in the past. I suggest doing some more research if you get a chance to on content pillars. It's a good chance that you have content now that you can turn into a pillar and help drive out your marketing calendar and your content creation calendar for the year. So that being said, how do you figure out what content pillars you need to create? So that's where I rely on the taxonomy. First time I ever did anything with a taxonomy, or even learned what a taxonomy was, I was at the Yellow Pages. I was given a task to create a taxonomy for a new product launch that we were doing. And if you've ever picked up the Yellow Pages and see how thick it is, that's all based on taxonomy. It's all category based. It organizes like your thoughts, your industries, and everything else all at once. So what is the taxonomy? Taxonomy, as I said, is just really a classification of building out like organizational tool for you to figure out like what type of content you need to create based on the categories. So here's an example of one taxonomy that I've run, which is growth. Growth content is always very important to B2B organizations because a lot of people are looking at ways for them to grow their business and what tools and what things they need to do to grow it. So growth is always a good taxonomy level 1 for most B2B organizations. Growth is where I started with the first content pillar that I created at Green Sky. It was just an ebook around growth, and then we started going into more subcategories in there. So you can use this for a strategy for either, all right, if we want to create a white paper around growth or ebook around growth, here are the different categories of the next level 2. Here's our thesis statement, growth based on strategy, innovation, marketing, and sales. And then you have your subcategories under that section would be here, like either 2 paragraphs or here's 2 separate sections on growth and growth strategy. Here's one on strategic planning. You can also use this to determine, like, when you're creating very robust pieces of content, like you want to just focus the entire ebook on growth strategy, you can, but then that always ties back to strategy and growth. This helps you too with your information architecture on your website when you're trying to organize like how you're putting your content out there. These are the categories that you can base it on. You don't always have to be like a theme like growth. It could be similar to what my current company is doing, Risk 360. Our content taxonomy is based on the industries that we serve. So we have one on security, one on privacy, one on technology. So these subcategories then become what's under security, the top 3 things under security, and then the subcategories under those things. So this is how I would organize the information architecture of our website, our information architecture for our content repository. And also this helps me when I start to build out my content calendar for the year, because I pick a topic based on this level 1 taxonomy for every month of the year. And then I might do growth 4 times in a year. But then I would go, all right, if we're doing growth, let's do strategic in Q1, let's do innovation in Q2, let's do sales and marketing in Q4. And then under each one of these, which subcategory will there be a content pillar piece based around? I then start going, all right, strategic. All right, so Q1, let's focus on strategic growth. And then that's the content pillar we create, and that's all the content that flows from there after that. Another thing that it really helps with is defining the topics that you're going to be focused on for the year. Very early on, when you build out your content calendar, it also helps you build out a keyword list based on these subcategories. It also helps, I think, with your production, because now you know what you're going to create, the topics you're going to use, you even know the keyword strategy that you're going to use. And then rinse and repeat the next year or the next quarter after you have created a lot of content pillars that have fueled your content for the year. What gaps do you have? Did we not cover market intelligence last year? Let's cover market intelligence this year. So this kind of helps drive your content production. It helps fill in gaps. It helps like build out your calendar and keep you organized, and also helps your organization of your website. So when people come there, they can find things easier. I think also with a taxonomy, it also helps with figuring out what you want your rankings to be for your website. So you figure out all right, if we want to rank on growth and home improvement, then that's something that now you have keywords driven, you have an organizational structure based on the content that you're creating. So taxonomy, very, very important. I think if you're going to create out a content strategy for the year, if you don't have taxonomy, you're probably missing out on a way to actually stay organized throughout the year. And it helps you scale when you start creating those content pillars, and then those content pillars help you figure out, what you really need to do for your funnel. So all 3 of those things are attached to each other. I hope I explained it well. If you want to ask me any questions or you just want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Corey Kevin Brown. I work for Risk 360. Look forward to hearing from you guys, and good luck with your content strategy for the year.